Hi everyone, welcome back to the Babylon Nines. Today we're going to be talking around Mr. Mark Noble and his role as sporting director of West Ham. Obviously, it's only his first month in the role, but we're going to try and maybe look a bit into what we think his role should be in the short term, but ultimately concentrating more on the long term. And it kind of leads me in really. So, what do you think about Mark Noble's role? What do you see as his role kind of developing into, or what it should be and what it should mean for West Ham?
Well, I think what he really wants to try and bring in is his sort of vision of how the football club should be run. And obviously, as a man who's been through every single step of the academy, I think he wants to make that a real cornerstone of the club. You and I have both spoken about how we feel the academy is being run at the moment, how it's not really producing at all. And, even if you think about the fact that our very best product at the moment is from Chadwell and not even from our own academy, you have to start scratching your head. Now, obviously, that's got nothing to do with Mark Noble. And it is very early in his sort of role at the club. But I think that's one of the key things for him that he will feel passionate about, is trying to make sure that he can get the academy back to where it was, producing talent regularly. And it's also going to be something that he wants to carry into the first team. If there's quality coming through the academy, are they going to be trying to play a certain way? You and I, again, have both mentioned our frustration at the mention of a certain German energy drink brand's model, the constant referral to that when someone came in the club, and how we haven't seen a single shred of that implemented. I think Mark Noble will be incredibly frustrated by that. You look at our transfer dealings, even in this window alone, a 30-year-old injury-prone striker who has consequently, as we are recording this, been ruled out 4 weeks, wasting us potentially £500,000 in wages and completely going against what we've heard as the vision of for this club. It's not a dig at Ings. You and I both called it when he signed. We said this is a stupid transfer unless we speed things up. We're not going to dwell on that for too long, but I think that when we talk about what Mark Noble wants to do, I think changing how we sign players, who we sign, and the speed with which we sign players is going to be a big part of that as well. Because when he spoke about how we're not run like a circus anymore, well, I would completely and utterly disagree with that at the moment. And
yeah, the big top is starting to erect its tent once again.
exactly. And I think, we can disagree with that, or people can get involved and say whether they think we're being run well. But I would really say that if you're going to argue that we are, look at any other decently run club in the league. Look at Brentford. If I would argue that if we're trying to pick well-run clubs, I think any well-run club in this league, Brentford are a good example. Two clubs in particular that I don't think get the credit they deserve worldwide, Monaco and Benfica. I'm not just picking those to try and be some sort of football expert online. I'm not, but they've both churned over close to €1 billion in profit. And
Paul Mitchell, isn't it, is the guy at Monaco who was at Red Bull, funny enough, went to Monaco. I think he's still there. He's a Tottenham fan, so there's a downside. But what a job he's done at two big clubs, and it's like you say, churned money and made ensure that those teams can kind of generate, like Tchouaméni, for instance, £16 million they bought him for, sold for nearly 100 million. So it's an incredible eye for a player and setting up a system.
So, I mean, that's really the model that Noble has got to has got to try and aim for. That's the target on the back as such. So, you know, this is Mark Noble's first job outside of being a senior player. So I'm not going to say I expect this. And you know, that's an impossible goal straight out the bat almost. But it's what you can aspire to. And if you have those goals, you're more likely to reach them than if you just set the bar low. So it's incredibly frustrating. I'm sure this window isn't a fair reflection of his own goals, his own mindset, because if I'm being totally honest, I think the club will have said there's a minimal budget, and unless things happen, unless we sell players, unless we move players, or unless a new manager comes in, we're not going to spend much. Yep. Now, the one potential transfer that we are looking at is someone we've discussed. You know, I'm a big fan of Moffey, but we should have had that done by now. So he's either not quite pulling his weight, or, as I mentioned, he's been sat back and looking how we do things, looking how the club is run, and we can't really judge that. You know, you can't really say he shouldn't be doing that, because if he wants to change anything, first you have to understand how it operates. It is incredibly frustrating, but I'm sure he's probably having exactly the same thoughts, just from a fan's point of view.
He maybe has a playing style he wants us to do, maybe wants to instill more of a genuine progression path through the youth system into the actual league team. So then I guess the other question comes into as to at what point does he also then start to look at the manager and actually start to apply pressure to the manager in which to start to fall into that? Because obviously, ultimately, as a sporting director, in my opinion, he is the guy that will be setting the tone for what type of football we want to play. What type of club do we want to be known at from a kind of footballing brands perspective, not just the overall club, because that's outside of his realms. He's all about the sporting side. So it's all very well having, you know, I want to push youth, I want to bring the youth through, but you need to have an identity elsewhere to ensure that an identity that supports that philosophy. And you would argue at the moment that philosophy is not evident. As we've said many a times, the Red Bull comment was absolutely and utterly lip service, had no bounds in reality. The Red Bull model is not just about buying young players. It's far deeper and richer than that kind of process. Do you think that there comes a point where Noble has to review the management at the club and maybe take a hard line as to if he wants to be or wants to adapt or adopt a methodology that's close to, say, a Red Bull or Monaco, where it looks at internally to bring through players that he maybe doesn't have a manager that is going to support that? Or, again, as I say, he has to start flexing and applying pressure as a director of football on the manager to essentially change or go, because he's going to be setting that idea. Really, it's not about the manager.
I mean, there does have to be that driving force, that thing that pushes you towards the ultimate goal. Now, the thing that we've seen from Noble, and obviously this is outside his time in his current role, but we know he's very passionate and outspoken about the academy. And if you particularly, when you think about when Grady was sold by Moyes, it's an example of, you know, how he feels that we should be playing, or how he used the academy and the process behind it. You know, this is someone who came all the way through the academy and is then sold. And he was vocal about it. And it's something that we've not really seen from West Ham players in a long time.
Yeah, he broke rank, essentially. It was something that was completely unexpected at that time.
I think he is going to have that. He is going to have that voice. If anyone who's met him will know that, you know, he's pretty honest, he's pretty upfront, and he's going to tell you what he thinks. So when it comes to something that he's passionate about, I expect more of the same. Now, you mentioned about the manager's role in that. I think he's going to be loud and vocal about how he feels the team should be playing. If he wants to implement a philosophy, like I am getting sick and tired of hearing or just having people roll their eyes at the West Ham way. This notion that, we can't have a philosophy of how we play football, or that we shouldn't want passing, flowing, but also often at times flair-based football. And, I think there comes a time when every single football fan, every single club wants something different. And Sean Dyche, to mention it, someone we've been linked with, is a good example of that. He took Burnley with a very specific style, and I would argue he actually tried to change how they played. I know they got relegated, but I would say that if he was backed a bit more, he probably could have fundamentally changed them and progressed them forward. But we don't see any of that at the moment. And I think long term, that's going to have to be something that Noble tries to implement with the manager. Do I think Moyes is that man? Honestly, no. I think, you can have the world's best technical director. They can sign you the best players in the world. But if the manager doesn't trust them, doesn't want to play them, or even, let's face it, plays a style that does not suit them, it means diddly squat.
Yeah, exactly. Now, if you look at Brighton, it's a prime example of a team that has a very clear philosophy, not only from a transfer perspective and a youth perspective, also when you talk from a manager. Potter went, they just dropped in De Zerbi. The football didn't change drastically, but it's changed a little bit. But it's that very clear, defined, this is the football we want to play. This is the type of management we are going to require, or management style and approach to football we're going to need. So it is copy and paste. Well, we've done copy and paste, but we've just kind of then not been consistent with how that manager also plays. Like, we've gone for these pragmatic managers, but they all have very different and sparse views on player types. Whereas, with Brighton, they've kind of, the manager is more a coach, arguably, and it's a bit more about, you are there to coach these players. These are the players we're going to be, and you fit the model of play, so these players are going to complement that. And I think that's something that we probably need to adopt. I think it's quite an old idea that managers are that entrenched. Even Pep Guardiola will say, I'm not interested in transfers. I'll give my view on a few players that I like and whether I think that player is good for us. But ultimately, I say, these are the positions I need, and this is what I need that player to do in that role. And then leaves it to his director of football, which is what I find interesting, that one of the best managers in the world do this, but yet there is always this kind of harping back to, no, the manager needs to be in control. Now, arguably you don't. If you have the team behind you, you allow the manager to concentrate on other things and then be, I guess, the final conversation piece in that transfer piece. Also, this is where you fit in my model and so on.
Well, the ironic thing is we have a chairman who completely and utterly just disregards that idea. You think about when Sam Allardyce talks about how he turn up and he would expect just a random player to be there who he had never met before, and how that had happened a few times, like particularly with Zarate. He just turned up. I had no idea he was coming. Now, I'm not saying that I expect us to be run like that going forward, because you and I both have this theory that he will leave, Sully will leave, and it will change things. But unfortunately, until that happens, I don't expect him to take that much of a back seat. I fully expect him to be, just every so often, drive up with a new player, or to be overruling Moyes in certain departments. Now, especially now someone has gone, especially now David Gold isn't there to kind of counter him anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, let's face it, that's probably what David Gold was doing a lot of, was saying, look, come on, we know he was very passionate about getting Moyes back. We know that he was a bit more of the reserved nature, but out of the two of them, now one is missing, and the other is a bit more trigger happy. He's probably got, no one watching the or holding those reins. And
Yep.
I think if Noble can get that trust, and if Noble can say to him, look, I have this philosophy in mind, this is how I believe we go about it, and this is why I think you should get involved, or buy into it, then that's going to be a key part of it. One thing that I think is, really kind of overlooked in Brighton's setup is their reliance on this homegrown kind of production line. And you see it with I know it's not technically homegrown, but their Irish striker that they've just brought through, and they've just started introducing. I know that's under De Zerbi, it's not so much under Potter, but he'd have been there at the same time. You look at the introductions that they made in the summer, the people they brought in, the recruitment-wise, they brought in Colwill on loan from Chelsea, and even little signings. I say little, but Danny Welbeck, Adam Lallana. These are players who they might buck this trend of young recruitment. However, they're there for a reason. They know that they fit into the style of play that the manager wants, but also they might tap into that homegrown number, and they suit the system. They also have experience, they have winning experience. And I think you can have that balance, but if your job is to go out and recruit, you need to be thinking, is it worth the cost? And I think Danny Ings could be a really valuable teaching point. I know that sounds quite condescending. I don't mean it to be, because that's what I used to refer to in some of the lessons that I used to teach, where your teaching point, that's something you take forward. And if he could look at Danny Ings and go, well, look, we had the right idea and the application of it was just not right.
Yeah.
I hope Danny Ings scores 10 before the end of the season. But at the moment, it's looking like a bad deal. Now, that's very early days, but if you have this example to go by, you can learn from it. And I think, there's always a good lesson to be learned from that. So,
and I think you're right. Sorry, go on.
Noble, I think he needs to decide how much of a role he wants to have in terms of dealing with the manager, because is he going to want to overstep or get involved with Moyes directly? Is he going to want to, be at the training grounds and potentially put his mark on the side? Or is he going to want to be purely in the back room, dealing with players, dealing with the academy youngsters, and more of a guiding hand or the puppet master sort of thing?
Yeah.
And that's the real interest that or conundrum he has going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's a valid point. And, we kind of alluded to it, is that, could it be the dawn of a new era for the Academy of Football? Can we see progression? And I mentioned about the Red Bull piece earlier, and the reason being is when we've heard that before, it's found to acknowledge the fact that the Red Bull model starts really from under sevens, and the under sevens all the way through to the first team. And again, this is because a sporting director, a director of football, have come to the conclusion or come to this design of, we are going to play in this particular way. We want to be a possession-based team that has technical players and will operate in a very, defined and definite approach. And from that, they can then drop that down all through the levels. And then they can, again, through scouting, will say, these are the types of players we need to find. These are going to fit in within that model. This is what we need. We need highly technical centre-backs who can play with the ball, who are comfortable bringing the ball out of defence, who again, have a good range of passing. We need midfielders who are not only robust and athletic, but again, comfortable on the ball, can play between the lines, very good movement. We need strikers that are mobile. All of these kind of profiles, and it's a very clear thing. So, from an under-7 level, players are able to progress. They also have extensions and tentacles everywhere in terms of teams in which they send players out to essentially develop. So from young ages, they are going out to other teams, developing. They're always in different environments, learning in different leagues where to play. And because there's that consistent level of football approach in terms of tactical and so on, those players can move up through the ages, and also then ultimately from the top elite versions of those academy players can then move into the first team much easier. It's a more seamless process because you're not essentially having to undo what you've learned at the previous level, because you're not then having a manager that has, well, no, the style's different up here. If you have that philosophy of you've got to play in a particular way and you filter that down through all your coaches and managers, then ultimately every player is going to develop to a role. And by the time they get into the first team, they're already at a very competent level. Tactically, they know what they're going to need to do. It's then just about their application of their own attributes themselves as to whether they can match up to the level of that league, that division, that competition they're in. But tactically, they're already knowing what they need to do, which is what Brentford do quite well, because again, they play similar football all the way through. So when players come in, that they're able to do it. So you'd like to think that Noble is going to push the youth integration a lot more, because again, we'd like you to see one of those players go in the summer in Declan Rice, and that's going to fund, well, probably partially funded this window and partially fund the next window. And what we kind of got to do is that we need to start understanding that we need to start developing ourselves. It's something that we haven't done very often. We sent players on loan, or we've sold a player early. Like obviously we just seen Ekwa has gone today. Aji Elise went in the summer. He's now starting to do well at Sunderland. And we're losing two players in defence. Well, we lost one already. We're going to lose one in the summer in Ogbonna. Again, we've sold a good, young, homegrown player that is now getting minutes and developing. Why was he not sent out on loan at least, seen how he develops, and then given a chance next year? I think that's hopefully what we'll see Nobles will start to impart, as to let's create greater connections with clubs, with managers, ensure that our players are playing when they're on loan, they are developing, and let's create an actual progression plan and pathway. I think that's the only way we're going to achieve. Now, it's a massive job on Noble, but he's taken this mantle. He wants to be part of this. I think at some point, he, as you say, he either has to be very much a guiding hand who's very soft and is mainly focused around talking players, bringing them through, encouraging and working in that way, or he's a much more focal figure, which I think most West Ham fans would like, because he's been a focal figure for, I think, many of our lives, for some of us, and would like him to be a bit more focal and a bit more, no, this is what I was taught coming through in those years of being under Tony Carr. There was a very particular set of football that we used to play, and this is how we brought youth through, and this is how they were developed. And you would like to think that he's going to essentially impart some of that Tony Carr essence, because let's face it, we have brought through some brilliant players in the past, but in the last 11 years, it's not been there. Now, some of that is going to need, essentially, our budgets are going to have to change. We're going to have to put more budget into youth. That includes coaching, facilities, everything. So it's a huge, huge piece of work, which hopefully Noble is up for. And I think he's already said that he really wants to see the youth come through. So he's going to have to, at some point, really impose himself, I think, on the current manager, if the current manager stays, to start saying you need to start bringing players through with more regularity and playing. We've mentioned it before that Ben Johnson, for instance, he's played a lot of games for West Ham. Some people don't think he's good enough, but I would also suggest that his development is consistently stunted because he's in and out of the team, and when he has performed, he's then out of the team the next time. So it kind of doesn't help. And when we look at also this season, one player has played one under 21 player has played any minutes in the Premier League for West Ham, and that is Divine Mubamba, which I think was about 10 minutes, if that. Otherwise, our youngest player is Ben Johnson at 22, then it's Declan Rice, and so on. So we, as a squad, as a team, we do not play youth. And for those that say, well, youth doesn't get you anywhere, take a good look at Arsenal. They have players under the 21 years and younger. They have invested a lot of time in those players and given them the chance to make mistakes, to learn, and to progress. And that's something that we haven't done. And I feel that if we want to go a step further, if Noble is going to be a success, he has to, one, impart a very clear vision for the club in terms of how we want to play. Once he has that, then you can then define as to hang on. No. Yeah, sorry, I was. Yeah. Wait. Shut. That'd be a cut. Yeah, so Noble will have to define as to how he wants the club to play. And for that to happen, he then has to have a manager that incorporates that style. And then again, it's having a scouting team that actually understand what profiles, what types of players we need to then go and bring those players in. And then from there, and then that's the only point when we can start to develop, when we actually have a very clear identity as to how we're going to play. And therefore, no manager that comes in matters because the manager is interchangeable because the style will never change. Therefore, you don't need to change your scouting team every year when a manager goes, and so on as well.
You mentioned a really good example then of with Arsenal, but they're also a really good example in terms of they've got a great player at the moment who has been out on multiple bad loans. You know, Ketia didn't play at Leeds, and he was quite vocal about the fact, I should be playing. I'm not very happy with the minutes I'm getting. I should be playing. And I think instilling young players with the confidence to come out and say that is a big part of it. You don't want people kicking up a fuss and causing trouble, but saying, I think I'm good enough to play and I'm not getting the minutes here. That's a big part of being a professional. If you say, I'm ready to step up to the plate, but I just don't think I'm getting it here, well, then the club can go, actually, you know what? We'll give you another try. We'll cancel this loan deal. We'll get you somewhere else. And Arsenal did exactly that. They've actually stuck by Nketiah as well and rewarded him with a big money contract based on, let's face it, last season, a goal here and there. He was working hard. He was coming off the bench and starting the odd game, but he's paying them back. And that's what happens when you have a system throughout and you have a good loan system that allows players to go out on loan, learn, and then apply later on. So with Noble, I think he needs to make that crystal clear. He needs to make what he wants the West Ham way to be, how he wants to implement that very clear, and whether that's just saying, look, we want to get you guys out on loan, or we want to get you training with the first team every so often. We want to get you mixing in. That's going to be a huge part of his job. Now, we're very lucky at the moment that we have got a youth team who are tearing it up and they are doing well. They are consistently scoring multiple goals and they look exciting, they look quick, they look energetic, but they also look physical. Now, those are kind of the cornerstones or the key elements of modern football. So how do you want to take that into the first team? What do you want to do? This is something that Noble has to really keep an eye on. And where I just don't really have any confidence with Moyes is he's not looking towards that. We've now got more substitutes available than ever, and yet these players aren't being given 10 minutes off the bench. They're not being given. I'm not going to have this idea that, you know, one appearance in the Europa League in a dead rubber game suddenly changes everything. It doesn't. If you want these youngsters to learn, you have to keep consistently giving them time. And we're just not doing that. So we need to use bench in a far smarter way. We need to use the youngsters in a far smarter way. And I think giving the team a very clear identity, which I would say it does have at the moment. It's based counter-attacking, and it's based on the fact that we break quickly. That needs to be addressed. You know, if you're a youngster coming through, if you're Okaflex and you potentially have the chance to get on, well, you know, well, I have to help out defensively, but when it comes to me, I'm going to break. I'm going to beat my man, and I'm going to look to carry the ball forward as quickly as I can and create a chance. If that's how we want to play going forward, fine. But it needs to come from the top. And I think the key part is getting the youngsters on the pitch and giving them the minutes. And I just don't really feel very confident with that at the moment.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And as you say, there's a level of work that Noble needs to do in which to ensure that the youth team and the first team are aligned, particularly the under-21s and the under-18s are the most aligned, because that is the most natural point of going through. And as you say, playing players in dead rubber matches isn't a reflection on, you know, how good that player is. Obviously, we saw Ollie Scarles, and Mubamba actually played fairly well in that game. I know some people say Mubamba didn't, but
even Ashby, you know, Ashby's a great example of a player who's
had his debut 2 years ago, and where has been. I know obviously he's had some injuries, but again, we've had players out of form, we've had injuries, not to be seen. He's looking to leave because of that. So I think that's where Noble needs to start coming in, obviously getting his arm around those young boys, be like, sounds so weird, but getting his arm around the youth players and being, you know, letting them know that the opportunities will come, keep going, keep fighting, you know, letting them know that he is in their corner. But then he also needs to be essentially the manager saying, right, why are they not playing? There needs to be, I don't think there's necessarily any accountability really for Moyes. Obviously, I think he'll obviously have questions about results and so on, but I don't think there's someone going, why are you not playing the youth? This is something we need to be doing. And someone actually forcing him to make some of these changes and to be more open to giving opportunities, not just the youth, but even the newer players that come in as well. Because it's all about that integration, all about that ability to, again, help players settle. You don't settle by just playing as a substitute.
I think the strange thing is as well, we've got a manager who was key in bringing through Wayne Rooney, saw the benefits of selling him on and, you know, getting that huge transfer fee and reinvesting it at the club that sold Rio Ferdinand for a huge amount of money. And then reinvested it. You know, we can argue whether we did that correctly or not. We didn't. But we have two pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that should have learned their lesson, and yet seemingly have no idea how to go forward, how to implement. And we keep making this same mistake. You know, we could have the next Michael Carrick in our academy. But if we don't bring them into the first team, people were talking about who's the youngster who was at Charlton, and Cullen.
Cullen, yeah.
Josh Cullen. You know, people were talking about Josh Cullen and how we should be playing him. Well, you know, that's all well and good, and you need to be looking at the players and thinking, okay, well, if they're that good, why aren't they getting minutes? If they're not getting minutes, is it a problem with the player themselves, or is it a problem with the manager and not giving them the minutes? So it needs to be this kind of cohesive unit, and questions have to be asked. You know, it's healthy for things to be questioned. And if Mark Noble wants things to improve at West Ham for the youngsters, he needs to do that.
Yep, and I think that's a great point to end on. Is that Mark Noble obviously is. I wouldn't necessarily a legend because I wouldn't put him on the same level as Bobby Moore and so on. But he's absolutely and utterly an icon of West Ham. There's no disputing that. And he's also comes from our youth system. He's a man that has prospered from being given a chance, and he got given a chance early. I believe he was 17 when he made his debut. And it's that kind of thing as to if you give young players a chance, obviously they need to be of an appropriate standard to do that. But if you give them a chance and then follow that up with additional minutes or get them out on good short-term loans and bring them back into the fold at the club, you can potentially unearth players like we have with Rice, which we played during a time of essentially a crisis of injuries. If we give these players a chance during those periods, rather than looking at the square peg solution that we have, we may actually start to then find that every summer it becomes less of a burden because we're not having to consistently go out and find 5, 6, 7 players because we are bringing in our own players. And also, like we've seen with the likes of Brighton, like we've seen with Brentford, going out and buying these young 18-year-old players who are playing first-team football in maybe lesser leagues, bringing them in because by the time they're 21, they are also homegrown. It's bringing in those players that are already playing football at a decent level, albeit in a lesser league, but bringing in those players who can actually help us to adapt, also to adapt to us and to then obviously give us more options in the future as well by giving them consistent minutes.
Well, even with that, it's the worst thing that can happen is a youngster makes a mistake. You only learn by making mistakes. Declan Rice against Leicester is a great example of that. But the juxtaposition is you give a youngster a chance, they might not be good enough long term. But look at what Makeda did at United. You could argue he won them the title, and he wasn't a very good footballer. No. I say won them the title. He really helped them towards the title.
But his goals were vital in that last run. Absolutely vital.
I'm not saying that we're anywhere near that. I'm not even saying that we have the luxury to do that. But what I am saying is you need to be able to give these players a chance to prove themselves, and you will get rewards. You might occasionally get punished, but you will get rewards. And things, if Okaflex were to come on, score some vital goals that kept us up, but he's deemed not good enough, well, you know what? The worst case scenario is you get a few extra million for him when you sell him on.
I think that's it as well. Look at Ashley Fletcher. Wasn't a good football player, but we bought him for, I think, 1.5 million off of Man United. Again, had injuries, we had to play him. Now, he wasn't great, but he worked hard, and then someone decided to pay 7.5 million for him to go to the Championship. And that's the point. Noble needs to instill that. Even if we don't think that they are the player long term, we need to give them opportunities in which to earn a contract elsewhere. And that's what it is. We can develop the player to a point, and if we decide that that player is not good enough, fine. But you sell them. But you've at least given them time and exposure within a bigger league that if they're playing to a decent enough standard, even if they're average, someone will take a chance and you're going to boost that kind of point. So I think it's fair to say we think Noble's got a massive role to play at West Ham. There are probably going to be a point where he needs to have a very hard look as to if he wants us to play in a particular way. Do we have currently the manager in place? Do we have the infrastructure which to do that? And then it's about once he makes a commitment to a style of play, to maybe a particular kind of philosophy in terms of how he wants players to be progressed and how he wants maybe the youth team to be incorporated. Once he's committed and wedded to that idea, it's then about selling it upwardly because obviously he needs support from the board. But then it's also, if it can't be sold to the incumbent manager or to the manager, then that manager is an obstacle that needs to be removed. And that's where he's then going to have to start being more ruthless and starting to say that anyone that doesn't fit my philosophy, because I have backing in the board, you are out. And it's all about that philosophy then doesn't need to change. It is then set in stone. And it means then that you can do things like Brighton. You can lose a manager. It doesn't matter because the next manager is exactly the one that fits. You can sell players. It doesn't matter because you've got players coming through or you're going to go out to the market and do that. It's about having such a very clear identity and clear understanding of what you need that you will, no matter what happened, change is inevitable, but you are ready for change when it does come. And not only are you ready for when it does come, you also can deal with the fluctuations that come with change. Some of them are good, sometimes not so good, but ultimately everything remains on a steady, even keel. Everyone is, set to that understanding. And it also means you set you up for long term. So when you do have those dips, you're always going to come back round and then obviously again have some success again. But I think we should leave it there on Noble. He's got a lot of work to do. It's a big month already for him, and he's only a month in. But yeah, let's hope that we can see some long-term games with Noble. We can start to see the Academy of Football coming back. And there's one last thing to say, and that is, come on, you Irons.